Nicole Scott here from Mobile Geeks, and today I'm going to be putting the Samsung Galaxy S6 clone, the No.1 S6i, up against the real deal. So now when we take a look at the No.1 S6i, it looks very similar to the Samsung. I mean, the most notable difference is it's missing Samsung here, and it says No.1 right here. So it's not actually trying to pretend to be a Samsung phone. It's actually just looking exactly like it. Now, under the hood, the specifications are actually quite different. Now, both devices have 5.1-inch displays, but Samsung's is clearly much better. It's AMOLED, it's 2560 by 1440 versus a 720p display over here. Now, let me just bump up the brightness on both of these just to give you a little look at how much more vivid the real deal is. So you can see that it's just a lot brighter, a lot more crisp. These colors are just a little more muted. The shadows seem to be, like there seems to be a bigger disparity between the shadows and the light areas through here. And just, I'm not saying that for the price, this is actually an amazing display now, because this is a $120 phone, and this is, well, a $700 phone. Now, if we take a look at the edges of this device, No.1 has done an amazing job at the finish of this. Now, both devices are 6.8 millimeters. So now the buttons on the No.1 really do feel fantastic. Their previous versions on the Galaxy S4 and 5 that I reviewed, the buttons did not feel this good. These buttons almost feel as good as what Samsung has created. So the biggest difference between these two devices is the front button. Now, Samsung's feels incredibly solid, has a very loud click. Now, if we take a look at the No.1, you can hear how that feels cheaper, right? But if you have gone hands-on with this in the past, the Note 4 button from No.1 was like jiggly. This one is only a little bit off. So you can see that there. There's only a little bit of kind of wiggle on this. This doesn't feel like it's going to fall off in like a few months like it did on their Note 4 clone. So this is actually greatly improved as well in terms of build quality. So here's a close-up of the Samsung button. So you can see how there's absolutely there's no wiggle on that. There's no room for any kind of movement. The button is just solid. You can also see when you have them up close like this that the finish of the button is not shiny on the No.1, whereas on the real Samsung, it has a bit of glare. This one's not really shiny at all. So when we take a look at the rest of the device, you can see that we've got the headphone jacks, the micro USB, and the single speaker in the same location on the back. Everything in terms of the hardware is completely identical. So you can see at the top there we have the microphone hole as well as the IR blaster. Now when we look at the camera, the protrusion is just as high and just as pronounced on both of them. So they are both sporting a 16 megapixel shooter. Of course, the No.1 doesn't have optical image stabilization, whereas the Samsung Galaxy S6 is one of the best cameras on the market, period. Now you can see that there's also the sensors here on the back as well as the flash. So this actually does come with a heartbeat sensor on the sensor. Press start. So now it only takes a one-time heart rate, it's not a continuous. So I mean, it's pretty similar, and I feel a little more hot right now since I took my fingerprint with, or my heartbeat with this one. So now let's take a look at performance, because under the hood we have a quad-core MediaTek processor, the 6582 at 1.3 GHz. This only comes with 1 GB of RAM, and unfortunately it only comes with 16 GB of ROM. Now, the interesting thing is this is almost broken into two partitions, which I'm not that fond of. I really think that even for the price, they should have gone with a 32 GB of storage, because 16 or 8 of real free memory is just not enough for your modern day Android, even though this is running Android 5.0 Lollipop. So you can see that this does take a little while to load. Now, the quad-core MediaTek they have in here is okay, but it's definitely not the powerhouse that we have with the Samsung Exynos processor. That's the 7420 at 1.5 gigahertz, and the Samsung does have 3 gigabytes of RAM. I mean, it's okay in terms of loudness. Alright, so you can see that you can play Real Racing 3 here. The thing is, it's getting kind of hot. So now let's look at the UI to see how similar these two devices are. So the TouchWiz launcher, I'd say looks the same. We pull down the notification bar, we still have S Finder and Quick Connect here. Let's just get rid of these. We can scroll through our notification bar here, so that's also the same. But you can see that the display brightness is much different. I did mention this before. I'm just going to tweak this down just a little bit on the Samsung because that's one bright display. Now if we head into settings, they are set up very similarly. So here we have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, mobile hotspot. This doesn't come with NFC, so you can see that there's no NFC area and payment over here. So motion and gestures, let's just head in here to see the differences. So this is gesture screen wake up. So we can do the double click to wake up the phone, slide to the left. So the gestures are different than what we have on the original S6. There's actually a lot more of them, to be honest. This has themes, this one doesn't. This has an easy mode, this one doesn't. So language and input you can change here on the number 1 to quite a few. So now let's check out the battery. So the Samsung will have better battery life than what we have here on the number 1, even though the number 1 has a bigger battery. So this has a 2,800 milliampere battery versus a 2,550 milliampere battery. Now I'm just going to be saying it's just about OS optimization right now. Both of these devices don't have the best battery life, but they definitely will both get you through the whole day. And when we go into the About phone, you can see this is running Android 5.0.2 and this is running Android 5.0. Alright, so I don't know if you'll be able to tell on camera that the blues are just a lot more kind of light blue here than on this one. If we go to these two photos, the water just seems a lot more aqua and there's a little more of a purple tinge on this one. So this one, it just seems a little bit brighter, a little like, whereas this one just seems more deeper and a little truer to what I expected from these photos. So now let's take a look at the camera in action. We have it focus, snapped, and there it is. All right, so we've got a little backlight there, it's a little fuzzy. All right, so now let's try the Samsung Galaxy S6. Right, so it takes pictures almost instantly. It dealt with the backlight so much better. All right, now let's take a look at a few pictures. So the Samsung Galaxy S6 camera is one of the best on the market, so it's almost not a fair comparison to put a $120 device up against it. However, in this moment, in indoor lighting conditions, I would say that the number 1 actually took a crisper photo of this little guy. Definitely. So that's actually quite a surprise because when we go through some of the other pictures here, like say these ones that I took outside, these are from the exact same position. Right? So this is just how cropped in this camera is. So it definitely pulls it a lot tighter. Right? So there you go. And in this photo, we lose completely the fans in here. So there we have a crisp photo of the grill and the blades, whereas here we don't have anything. These are some dumplings outside. These just look like you want to eat them, and these look a little bit washed out. The difference in kind of texture and color didn't quite come through as well in this instance. Right, and here you can see that we lose a lot of the scene, and this is definitely HDR on, so there's a lot of heavier contrast you can see there in the tree. Here's at a park, and I tried to catch the kids. Right, so that's just so much clearer, whereas this is just a little fuzzy. I mean, this is a kid on a swing, so for a $120 camera phone, this actually isn't. It's not the best, but I mean, it's not terrible. Here, it's very obvious what the difference is. We have leaves on these trees, and here, there's leaves too, but they're not. It's definitely not the same. Right? There's just a real lack of detail in a lot of the photos here on the No.1. And here, this looks like a much brighter scene, a lot more texture, whereas this looks a lot gloomier. Although these cars, though, are driving along, and the No.1 S6i has actually captured them fairly well. Now here's a necklace in the shop. You can see that the wood just has a lot more texture. Let me zoom in on these charms. This is just completely formless. That's not that crisp either, but much better than what we have here. You can just see there's just a tremendous more detail. Oh, getting messages. There's just a lot more detail on this chicken, this plastic chicken, than there is here. This has kind of pulled the highlights out, and it's not dealing with the glare very well behind the glass. Here's taking a picture of a little stall, and this backlit sign, it's not doing well at all. Whereas here, it actually did a fairly decent job. I mean, when you zoom in on the background over there, there's complete lack of words, whereas here you can actually still see there's Chinese characters there. So you can buy 6 No.1 S6i's for the price of one Samsung Galaxy S6. What are you getting when you're going to pay $600 more for a handset? Well, you're going to get a better camera and better battery life. But pretty much everything else about the S6i is identical. They're pretty close on TouchWiz. There's a few small things that are different. The display is obviously much better on the original Samsung Galaxy S6. But if you're just after a phone that looks kind of good, and you're not that heavy of a smartphone user, you may just want to invest into the Samsung Galaxy S6i. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm your host, Nicole Scott for Mobile Geeks.